Okay, so hi everyone. Good evening here from Jakarta. Thank you very much and congratulations for being the selected candidates of our first ARNECC Energy Climate Training Program. For your information, this initiative will be delivered in collaboration with Moya Analytics, a Singapore-based company that supports governments, organizations, and business in addressing energy and climate challenges through data-driven analysis and practical planning tools. And as I shared the material and also schedule, I hope you guys have read it, and I hope this training will be aligned as what you expected. And with us here today, we already have Miss Aldila Nurrahimah, Project Manager of the ASEAN Climate Change and Energy Project, and also Monica from Moya Analytics. To begin with, please allow me to invite Miss Aldila to deliver opening remarks or welcoming remarks for the selected candidates. Miss Aldila, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Indira. Good evening, everyone. Very, very happy to see everyone faces in here. On behalf of the ASEAN Center for Energy, I'm very happy to welcome you all to the ARNECC Energy Climate Training Program. And also, I guess, first of all, congratulations to all of you 20 selected participants. We have like more than 1,000 participants, like very strong interest in this program. So we are very, very pleased, very happy to have such a diverse group joining us from different backgrounds and countries across ASEAN. I think, if I'm not mistaken, we have representative from almost all of the 11 ASEAN member states. So congrats to everyone here. And I would like also to thank Moya Analytics. Our trainers, Monica is here, and the Accept team for Indira, Natania, and everyone who's making this program possible. And I do feel like this training comes at very, very important time. When we're talking about ASEAN's energy demand, it always continues to grow. If you are, especially if you are reading our ASEAN Energy Outlook, but at the same time, the region is working to reduce emission. We are trying to strengthen our energy security and also respond to climate change. And these issues are closely connected and cannot be addressed separately. So that is why this program is very important. It's not only about learning modeling or a modeling tool, it's also learning on how to ask better questions, to understand different future scenarios, and then to try to translate these technical analysis that you learn into useful insights for policy and decision making. So I really encourage you all to be active, to be curious, and to be critical. Please do ask questions, share your own experiences, and learn from one another. You are like 20 chosen one that joining this training program. And we also know, we understand that many of you are joining this training alongside work or study commitments. So thank you so much for making the time. We hope that the sessions and also the assignments will be practical but also enjoyable. And at ACE, I think we believe young professionals, like everyone in here, young researchers have a very important role in shaping ASEAN's energy future. The region needs people who can connect energy, climate, policy, and social consideration, and turn these complex analysis into recommendation that people can actually use. And we are hoping that this program will support you in doing exactly that, not to put pressure on you. Once again, welcome to the program. I wish you a productive and enjoyable learning experience, and I look forward to seeing your progress over the coming days. Thank you so much. Back to you, Indira.
Thank you, Aldila, for the welcoming remarks. And ladies and gentlemen, we also have the CEO of Moya Analytics here, Anik Ahsan. So, Anik, would you like to share with us one or two words to welcome our 20 selected candidates out of more than 1,000 applicants? Please, the time is yours,
Uh,
Anik.
okay, thank you, Indira. Okay, so firstly, congratulations for being selected. It's a 1 to 60 chance. So this was we can see like there's a huge amount of demand for this kind of training. And basically, one of the things that we really want to do with this is we want to create capacity within Southeast Asia, right? We want to have a just transition because we've seen that sustainability, energy modeling is becoming a huge necessity. Not just because of like in general, because of sustainability, but even when it comes to like AI and stuff, we're seeing that the need for energy is required. And we have to have trained experts in the ASEAN region that can support this kind of increase in demand for this kind of energy while making sure that our governments, our private sector, our NGOs also take into account the environmental side of things. So that's why for Moya, we're working with ASU to see how we can train the next generation of energy modelers within ASEAN so that we don't have to like just depend on a lot of the expertise from other parts of the world. We really want to have homegrown talents within your countries so that we can support ASEAN for ourselves, right? So yeah, congratulations once again for being chosen, the chosen 20 energy modeler. So yeah, hopefully you guys are able to get all the skills as much as possible. I know this is just like a first part of like energy modeling. 1 week is going to be very intense, but I'm sure that all of you are going to get out of it and learning a lot of energy systems modeling and apply it to the different fields that you're coming from. Because we see people from all the different ASEAN member states. We have people from all different, a mix of genders. We try to get a nice balance. And we also have a lot of people from different academic backgrounds, from different industries. So please also talk to each other as well. It's not just about like us connecting with you, but also use this as a platform to connect with each other as well. So yeah, so with this, I hand it back to Indira. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Anik. So, since Anik has completed his welcoming remarks, I guess we can just start the training. And just a kind reminder, our colleague Monica has already sent you a pre-test assignment. Just for us to make sure your progress and also your activities during this training and how this training can improve your knowledge and etc. So we appreciate a lot if you can fill it first before you do the training, so we can track your progress and make it more or improve more in the future. So I guess we can start the training. So I will give the stage for Monica. Thank you,
Uh,
everyone.
Sorry, Indira and Monica. Maybe before we start, shall we start with a photo together since Anik is also here and this is the first day of the training? Shall we do that?
Yes, sure. May I ask Tanya support to screenshot? I will count. Okay, everyone, please open your camera. Okay, I will count 1, 2, 3. Once again, 1, 2, 3. All right, thank you, everyone. I hope this session will bring an insightful session for you. And please don't be shy to ask any question.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Aldila, Indira, and Anik for your introductions. I think there's not much more for me to say introductory, but definitely emphasize. Please ask questions if it's helpful to like raise hands. And if I don't see hands raised, if like Indira, Anik, or someone like can just like flag me and interrupt me, please go ahead. And I'll stop for the questions. But yeah, hopefully that helps. And I'll share my screen. Go. Is that visible in the slides?
Yes.
Great. So yeah, this is going to be the first lecture in the ARNECC Energy Climate Training Program. As you received the invitation and have been selected, this is welcome from my side. So this is a 5-part course, so like 5 contact hours that will teach you sort of like at a high level, everything that you need for collecting data, defining scenarios, like Aldila was saying, defining the good questions to ask, specifically run the Stevens energy system model, which we will get into as the program advances, and use a tool called the Global Mitigation Potential Atlas, which we've been developing. So the course aims, by the end of it, you should be able to have that general understanding of energy systems, understand what Stevens is and what other energy modeling tools are, and what types of questions they answer. Collect, be able to format and change units and verify energy and other demand data for any country or any specific case of study that you have. Build new case studies from scratch and run multiple scenarios depending on those types of questions. Finally, be able to read and interpret the model outputs, perform some sanity checks, and identify problems if there are any. So moving on from this, you should have received this course structure outline. So basically today we're going to look into energy systems and the energy transition with some detail into modeling software that is out there and the GMPA tool. Tomorrow we'll move into from real energy systems into model variables and how we define these within the model. Lecture 3 will go specifically into the Stevens network, so we're going to dive into how we're going to model it. And then lectures 4 and 5 will focus on data collection. So that's a general guideline, and I have this here as reference. But today, specifically, we'll go into the energy challenge first and some contextual background, which I'm sure many of you are already familiar with. We'll move into the building blocks of energy systems, then modeling tools, and finally, I will introduce the GMPA tool, just so you can see how that works, and maybe you can have a look after the session yourselves. So the energy challenge. As you can see in this plot, global energy-related emissions have been on the rise for the last few decades into reaching a very high level of emissions, so approximately 37 billion tons in 2023, which is the highest level ever recorded. For context within this, we know that the 2015 Paris Agreement has committed countries to limiting the global warming to scenarios that involve 1.5 degrees of warming to 2 above pre-industrial levels. So this is an average of temperature across a couple or 3 decades. And to meet this target, global emissions would have to meet net zero by the year 2050, according to the projections and the scenarios that the IPCC and that we have developed. So this requires transforming within the energy system, electricity, heat, transport, and industry simultaneously. So I have that asterisk there just because I've mentioned these end uses or sectors that relate to the energy system, not just the environmental global challenge, which involves other sectors, and we'll go into that in a minute. But modeling helps us close this gap that we currently have between the current policy trajectories and the way that the world is going to what is needed to reach these kinds of targets. And this has been done for many, many years now. But it's very hard questions to answer. So the sources of emissions come from a very wide range of end uses and sectors. So as you can see in this plot, which is we're using data from 2016, so it's a little bit outdated, but the shares roughly remain. We see that a very large part, almost 3/4 of the total global emissions come from the energy sector and energy use in different ways. So we have energy use in industry, as you can see at the top here, or we can have energy use in buildings, and that creates emissions that come from different sides. Second largest emitter is agriculture, forestry, and land use. So that is involves in deforestation, livestock and manure, anything that has to be related with land use. And we also have waste and industry. These are the highest emitting sectors and the ones that are more important to abate, but also tend to be difficult. So this sort of shows that the complexity of reducing those global emissions to meet the targets that we have in the Paris Agreement requires different approaches. There's no single solution. Even within the energy sector, we cannot decarbonize the transport sector that we do the power sector, like the electricity system, or the industry. There are different approaches and different technologies that need to be adopted so that this can be achieved. So why do we model energy systems? So as I've been mentioning, that like this leads to the complexity of how we view these systems, and interconnecting technologies and flows make it very hard to sort of like come up with those solutions or answer these questions. And decisions today may be able to shape the system and the effects that happen in decades to come. Energy infrastructure and a lot of the infrastructure that we develop can last for many decades. So it can either lock us into a certain path or make it more difficult to get out of it later on. Furthermore, future conditions are obviously very uncertain. So the patterns that demand is going to take, whether that be electricity demand or fuel demand, the technology and the fuel costs in the future, what are the climate impacts, how are those things going to affect the system, and the policy priorities that will change over time. Today, there may be a policy that incentivizes renewable energy, which in the next presidential or political period, that might be taken back. So the things that we see on the day-to-day, these uncertainties are very difficult to be able to establish a path. So energy system models provide us a structured way to represent these systems, at least up to a certain extent, test assumptions, and explore these alternative features. Within these models, so many of them will identify, for example, cost-optimal solutions. So that would be like the cheapest option that you have to achieve a specific target, and that those like specific things, that's the things that we're going to be defining, and you can define a range of them within the models. Other models may be designed to evaluate different impacts, so that's like more scenario analysis, where you look at different assumptions, different possibilities of policies or technology costs, and you compare what would happen if this other thing happens. So that helps us understand different pathways and address the uncertainty of the future that we have. One thing that I do want to caveat quite strongly is that models, first of all, they do not make the decisions, but they help us understand the implications, the trade-offs, and these uncertainties. So we need that human input and analysis and sort of rounded definition of what the model will look at. And understand what the results actually mean so that we can interpret and apply them in a way that's useful. So using this quote from a statistician, all models are wrong, but some are useful. Just to keep in mind, everything will be an abstraction of the reality that we live in, but we try to make it something that is useful for us to plan for the future. So closing on that, moving on to the building blocks of energy systems. So I'll first focus on the power system, because that's a large part of the energy system, and it's very sort of like directly related to a lot of energy modeling in the space. So every time we switch on a light or charge a phone, turn the television, you're drawing on the power system. And this energy has a journey. So it's been generated somewhere. So that can be a wind farm, if it's renewable electricity, or a gas solar panel, or a gas plant, for example. And then it's moved through infrastructure, so the power lines and the substations, and then it's converted to the form that you actually end up plugging in your house or in your building. This system must be balanced continuously. So the electricity system at every moment must have the energy being generated at one point matching the energy being demanded. So that's one of like the big complexities of operation of power systems. Because when this balance breaks and when the frequency of the power system is outside of, for example, like 50 hertz, then the system can come into like blackouts or some system failure. And that creates a lot of instability and problems when people actually need the electricity. So that's the main sort of high level overview of what a power system is. And we can look at 4 different parts. for example. As I mentioned, we start at the generation. So that converts primary energy or primary resource into usable energy. So that can be a fuel in a thermal power plant that turns it into electricity, or solar PV converts the sunlight into electricity, wind, etc. Then we have demand, and that's what the end user, so us, every time we plug something in or turn a light on or use electricity in any way, that's what the system is serving for us. Then we have the grid. So that's like both transmission and distribution. Transmission is the high voltage of like rapid and large infrastructure getting from like very spread out places. And distribution is for once it reaches a city or a little town or something, then it distributes it to like all the buildings or the houses and anywhere that electricity is needed. I've added storage here as a fourth component because that's very relevant to moving into renewable energy, and that is able to move energy in time. So it can store the energy that was generated during very like high solar power hours, for example, and then move it to the time when it's needed a little bit more. And there's different kinds of storage. So we do have lithium-ion batteries, but there's also hydropower storage, and it can be stored as well in chemical carriers such as ammonia or hydrogen. So looking at the generation first. This is conversion, as I said, of resources into usable energy. One of the big ways that we can distinguish and identify different kinds of generation is whether generation is dispatchable or non-dispatchable. So this distinguishes, let's say, like the conventional generation, which is fossil fuel power plants or thermal power plants that are dispatchable, so like gas or coal power plants. So you can turn them on to provide that flexibility to the system. Whereas on the opposite side, if you see solar PV or wind, they can only generate when there is enough sunlight or where there is enough wind. So you don't have control over when you're generating, and you can't really stabilize the system using these resources. You have to use some other kind of flexible source. Power plants are sort of like the ultimate source of flexibility in conventional power system, but batteries, for example, could come in to replace that if they can store, as I mentioned, excess solar or excess wind at a time where there's not much demand, and then they can provide it when there is the demand for it. Then we go into the grid. So again, this is a network infrastructure that connects generators to the end consumer. And the storage of it is not as easy as it is with like storing water or something different. So that's why we need these technologies like batteries or like pumped hydro storage to do that. And as I mentioned before, the transmission is a high voltage power lines that carry over long distances, and distribution is your local network. The demand, here we have a demand curve on the right. So that is the total energy used or power used by people, businesses, industry, anything that is connected to the grid will contribute to like this, let's say like at a national level, a national demand curve. So this is for example, for a single day in this curve, and you have that rise in the morning of energy demand. Then you have maybe a little bit of a sort of stabilization, or even could be a little bit of a drop during the middle of the day. And then in the evening, it could rise again for like cooking, or like you're back home and using more electricity, and then it goes down overnight again. There are different patterns. So you have like those typical like weekdays or weekends within the day. And you can also have that seasonal pattern. So you may use, if there are, for example, here in the UK, if there is a lot of electric heating, in the winter, you're going to see a big spike of energy use through electricity if people are heating their homes with electricity. In the summer, then it would be less, and so on. In warm climates, it might be the opposite, right? It might be summer is using a lot of air conditioning, whereas in the winter, you don't need it. Going into the details of storage. Again, this is to move energy in time from times where we have that excess generation particularly important for renewable energy. And what this looks like is having this curve. So if we imagine this blue line to be that very like stylized daily demand, we have the sun starts shining around here, and then we get all of this energy. Sort of the red here would be provided by solar power if we have that like battery solar equipment. But then at this point, because there is less demand, then we have this excess solar. So that can be one or two things. That can be curtailed, which means we stop producing, like we disconnect or we turn off that power plant into the grid or into this small system because it stopped. We stopped needing it with the demand. But we have this battery, so we can charge this battery that can then help us discharge here. So at this point, anything that's not hashed would have been provided by the grid, for example, but we have this been provided by the battery, and we try to use more of the solar energy. Let me just see a question in the chat. Any demand is kilowatts recorded at shorter time step, 10 or 15 minutes. Yes, so the plots are sort of like distributed into bigger time steps, but electricity is always this instantaneous generation and demand. So it is in kilowatts or megawatts or watts, even if it's like a smaller thing. That's just like every second, every moment this is being recorded. Depending on the systems that you have, you can have sort of different levels of granularity. So like how often you're going to be looking at it. But the management of generation and to match that demand, that has to be like basically instantaneous. So yes, at every moment you'll have those kilowatts being matched between demand and supply. I hope this answered the question, but yes. Okay, cool. Okay, so we've seen the power sector, but energy systems connect multiple sectors, right? So they include power, transport. So if we're looking at trains, road transport, even aviation, if we go into industry, like I showed in the emissions at the start, so we can have either all of the electricity that you need to power an industrial manufacturing plant, or also like all of the fuels and any other type of energy that you need to manufacture your goods. Buildings, so that can be heating and cooling, or other types of energy used in buildings. Energy used in agriculture, so not like other activities, but anything that has like energy related use in agriculture, and aviation and shipping between countries. So this always includes there's production of fuel, electricity, whatever that may be. You convert that to the useful type of energy, transport that from where it's been generated and converted to where it's needed. You may store it or not, depending on how the energy is used, and use the energy across all the sectors of the economy. So transport sector. Naturally, this sector's end use is moving people and goods around mostly. And it's quite difficult to fully electrify. We have several vehicles or types of transport that are like require very high density of energy. So like aviation is very difficult to electrify. And we have like long-lived vehicle fleets. So, and that like takes a long time to really change. We have refueling, or in case of like electric vehicles, charging or discharging infrastructure requirements, and a range of very demand forms. So if you have an internal combustion engine vehicle, then you might have different kinds of fuel, so petrol or diesel, technology or the type of transport. So that can be road transport, that can be, again, like ICEs or electric vehicles, or you can have rail transport, trains, and then the purpose and the size. So if the purpose is for private transport, it's probably going to be small cars or motorbikes or different kinds of like private individual transport, or for you and your family, or public. So that's a lot more like larger infrastructure for that. This is very important to model the implications and understand what the electrification rates are and the effects that that will have on the grid with charging behaviors, which will help with like how transport policies can affect those emissions. So if you electrify a big share of the transport sector without changing how you generate electricity, there's going to be a lot of problems because your total grid demand is going to grow because now you're charging vehicles with electricity rather than going to refuel them at a petrol station. And if you don't have enough electricity, or if your electricity relies on coal or gas that are like high emitting sources, then the environmental goals start flipping. So there's an important need to understand how this will go forward to be able to plan for it. Going into the industry sector now, this NGC is producing and supplying materials and products, and it requires some electricity to some extent, but at most it requires energy for high temperature heating. So or mechanical process for melting metals for the steel industry, or if you really need to heat limestone to very high temperature so that you can produce raw materials for cement and that sort of thing. And that heat is conventionally produced with fossil fuels. This is a very hard to abate sector because of these variety of energy requirements and the really high energy demand that these need. There's some parts of the processes that also cannot be fully electrified. So you need to do fuel switching, for example. And one of the alternatives that can be explored in this sense would be, instead of using carbon emitting fuel, we would use like hydrogen. And that's part of like the research and the things that are going to try and fuel switch and decarbonize that side of it. Up to a certain extent, you can electrify, but electricity is not the only source that you need to use. And there's also carbon capture sort of at the source. The energy use of industry is not the only emissions that we have in the industry sector. There are certain industries, for example, the cement industry, that have process-related emissions. So by heating up limestone, which will create the compound that is needed for cement, that releases CO2 in itself. So it's not only that energy or those fuels that we're burning that are creating those emissions, it's that the process itself that has them, or other chemical industries. And that's where carbon capture becomes essential to fully decarbonize this industry. I wanted to just touch on sector coupling. Because of all of this interconnectedness between the sectors that we see and how the emissions are created, this integration of these independent sectors can be used to like maximize the use of renewable resources that we have, or low or zero carbon emissions. And it helps with, when you go into electrification, for example, part of like electrifying part of transport, it would shift energy intensive uses from fossil fuels to electricity. So that helps us with the emissions. As mentioned before, it may bring up challenges with how we operate the electricity system. There's power to X. So this can be different sort of conversion. So we convert electricity to other usable energy like heat or gas, or we use electrolyzers to produce hydrogen, so that we can store energy, for example, or use hydrogen in the industrial processes with fuel switching. So that's one of the options. It's kind of like electrification, but we're now converting it for other usable types. And this coupling of the whole system, like being able to look at it in a broad way, it would allow ideally systems to like balance energy supply and demand. But it also increases the complexity of the model if we really try to get everything into one single thing. But this is sector coupling is a very important approach to like modeling the whole system so that we can see real effects. Okay, part 3. We'll go into a short introduction on some energy tools, energy modeling tools that are available. So there's no lack of energy modeling tools currently. There's both open source versions and there's proprietary software that different like policy makers use or dispatch power system operators. So there's a very broad range of tools that are available, which may have many similarities between them, but they may also like answer different or slightly different kinds of problems or questions that we have. So for example, I've listed just a few examples here. We have capacity expansion modeling or planning, which involves over a long pathway, over a long period of time in the future. We are planning how the capacity of the system is going to grow. So if we look at only the electricity sector, let's say, yeah, we're planning from now to 2050. So it will tell us what's like the least cost option so that we can build what, when, and where we build it. Then we have power system operation. So these are like more complex systems and that look into the actual power flows of a system. And that's to like dispatch and match demand with the supply. We have integrated energy system models, which try to like do this sort of like sector coupling and building everything together. We have demand forecasting tools, which I've included here in sort of like parts of modeling software because they do have some modeling aspects to estimate what the demand will be in the future. And it could also be like kind of like scenario analysis, depending on what assumptions you have for forecasting tools. And finally, scenario and policy analysis. So this is, like I mentioned at the start, so you have different policy options, and then you try and measure the effects that they will have by running a series of scenarios. So that's like simulation tools. These tend to run very, very fast and test, sort of like allow you to test many options of where your system might go. Some practical examples of these, and you might have heard or used some of these tools if you have been in the sector at all. So we have Leap. This is proprietary software, which does have free licenses available. And its main focus is scenario analysis and simulation. So a note on the main focus column, a lot of models do more than one thing. And like more and more, we try to make models do like most of the things that we can do with them without eliminating that usefulness of the model. But this is sort of like the main focus that they have. Then we have Plexos, which is a proprietary software, and that does energy market simulation. So that involves energy prices and other types of costs within that. So like this will include market analysis. Then we have Times. That's also a very known model, which is open source in itself, but it does use code and language that is proprietary. So it's modeled in GAMS, which is not an open source software. And this is integrated energy system optimization. So that tries to go have a look at the whole energy system. And then I've listed three options of open source modeling. So we have first PIPESA, which has different sort of applications specifically. They have developed PIPESA for Europe and PIPESA Earth, which allows you to model any region of the Earth you want. And that's like mostly power system optimization, although it goes into capacity expansion planning as well. So it has both those sides of like short-term power system operation optimization with planning for the future for a long-term system. Similarly, we have Osmosis and its counterpart, Osmosis Global, which do integrated assessment and energy planning, so also that capacity expansion, and include sector coupling as well. And finally here, because that's the sort of like the relevant modeling tool that we're going to be using, I've put down Stevens. Both PIPESA and Osmosis have been more widely used throughout like the literature and academic papers. Stevens was developed by our CEO during his PhD. It's also an open source modeling tool, and its focus is scenario analysis and optimization. So linking both that simulation side of things where you can run things quite fast to get results, but the scenarios that you're running are themselves a least cost optimization problem. So it will tell you the cheapest way to build a system under the conditions that your scenario has defined. I've put in here some resources for you. All of these, the slides, by the way, will be shared at the end of the week with you. So these resources I can, we'll share with them with you so you can have a go if you're interested. So there are quite detailed courses for osmosis. So here's a link for that. This would take about 20 hours to complete. There's the Pipes at Earth documentation, and in there they have links for other tutorials. For example, I've linked this playlist. It might be similarly like 20 to 30 hours. The osmosis course, I would recommend maybe first, since it already has sort of like built-in like learning materials very specifically to like learn it. Whereas Pipes at documentation, it might be a little bit more sort of like a little bit more painful to go through the entire thing and finding the right links and tutorials, whether this one is already structured. But yeah, these have both have a rising popularity recently and are useful tools to have. So yeah. And then finally, wait, let me check the question. Oh yeah, I've answered that. Yes, we will receive a copy of the slides. Okay, so finally we have gotten to part 4, and this is an introduction to the GMPA tool, which is under development. So what is the Global Mitigation Potential Atlas? This has been an initiative to map like a global energy systems where regions and countries may collaborate within each other. So what would be the central question first is like, what is the cheapest combination of generation, storage, and transports? And with the, please note that in this case, transport means like transport of energy between locations, not the transport sector itself. Transport sector will be modeled in the future, but currently the GMPA has the power sector modeled. That can meet demand at net zero emissions. So we will get to that system, and we also explore different steps of how much emissions you have and how you can reach net zero and what the combination is between those steps. And we'll show that in a little bit. This is all powered by the Stevens model. So that's like multi-location, multi-vector, so different types of energy carriers will be able to be modeled in here. And the end goal is to have a global scale analysis. We currently have 30 countries modeled for the power sector, and we are growing. So one of the main aims of the course and for you to like gain throughout this is to be able to collect input data, for example, renewable profiles or demand profiles and techno-economic parameters. So how much technologies cost or what the efficiencies are, what emissions certain technologies have, and then run Stevens and produce results. I think there was another question. Let me just check. So question looking at the parameters considered for energy modeling. How do you price in negative externalities related to critical mineral extraction required for manufacturing renewable storage, for example, lithium for lithium batteries or nickel for EV cars, etc.? So it depends on the model that you're using. Currently in Stevens and in the models that we've presented, there's no explicit accounting of these externalities. So part of the limitations as well of like certain models and things is that there are things that are left out of scope or left for other models or other tools or other parts to account for them. So yeah, at the moment, we don't have the price for those negative externalities. As we go through the week, it'll become more clear what the considered parameters and what things are included in Stevens, and how these assumptions sort of impact that we're considering or not considering these kinds of things. Okay. So yeah, Stevens is behind it, and you will get to sort of go through the whole process of it, collecting the data, defining the parameters, and run the model to produce some results and be able to analyze them. So GMPA, a little bit of how and when we've been able to launch this. In phase 1, we developed models for nine ASEAN countries, and we had Korea as well. This was presented and launched in COP28. And then we made it grow in coverage. So like global coverage, we increased that to include 30 countries overall in the world. And we are currently working on phase 3, which will be officially launched in COP31 this year. And that will expand the depth, the breadth, and the impact. So we're looking to add a few countries while expanding on sectors. So that's like the depth and the breadth. And then impact, we're developing these kinds of like capacity building exercises. So that's like the aim of the project in itself, and how the tool is useful. And now we're going to look into what the tool looks like and the things that you can view in terms of like results and analysis. So this will be how the going into explore the atlas looks like. There will be a link to this at the end of the slide deck as well, and I can share it with everyone in the chat just in a little bit. So first of all, we can select filters on the left for different things. So there's the list of countries that are highlighted in blue are going to be listed down here in this list as well. And there's these filters that will help us view results depending on the price point that we would put emissions at. So like how much it would cost per ton of emissions abated if we had these. You can view the mitigation potential. So this scale here is how shaded the countries are in the map. So for example, if you see here, Brazil has a darker shade. So that means that it has higher mitigation potential at sort of like net zero dollars per ton of CO2. So if there is at no cost from the reference business as usual version, they would have like a higher mitigation potential than, for example, the USA, which is a lighter color. So that's like that guide that will appear here in the bottom. You can select a country directly by clicking into the map or in the list. Both display the same thing, which will be this side panel. So the side panel for Indonesia example has these numbers here. So if we have no additional expenditure compared to business as usual scenario, and these are all subject to the modeling assumptions, we would be able to abate this amount of emissions, so 712.2. If you spend a little bit more money, then you can have higher abatement until you get, if you spend $50 per ton of CO2 that you're going to abate, you could abate this value, which for Indonesia's case, in our modeling, it ends up being actually like net zero. You can explore country details as well. So this will have some policy information, a little bit of context of the country that you're analyzing that we've done. And you can look at this dynamic Pareto abatement cost curve. So once you click this curve, you're going to see this annualized cost and the y-axis, and then you have emissions at the bottom. So this, and in the web tool, you can drag the orange circles to view different combinations. But the idea here is, for example, so these would be like the highest emissions that Indonesia would have. And these come from this mix of technologies, which you will be able to see in this plot here. But if you reduce the emissions, then the cost might start increasing slowly in total, and your technology mix also changes. So if you see by 75 megatons of CO2 here at the bottom, the combination already includes this red technology, which is probably PV. So there's the interactive axis handle, or it was wind. So you have that red technology is wind, and this will change. So the bars will be changing while you slide the orange levers up in the curve. You can see this for any single country, or you can see those for collaborations. Collaborations can be viewed if you click this button, and you can select the countries for collaboration. So here it will display the possible countries that we have already modeled within the tool. So Indonesia, it'll start adding the countries for your coalition that you want to see. And then you'll be able to see those results. So that's like the basic overview of the platform. And you can explore that in your own time. Later, I can send the link. But yeah, those are the results. And this will be improved upon and expanded upon as we add more sectors and more countries into the tool. So it's a sort of like evolving and in construction that will be continuously adding more to it, so that the model and the results are more useful to start conversations about how countries can collaborate to reduce their emissions and the levels of like expenditure and costs that these will have. Let me see questions. Okay, so a question. As this modeling tool like GMPA become more accessible, how do we make sure that decision makers use model outputs to inform judgment rather than treat them as definitive predictors? Yeah, I think this is a very important note to have. With so many models, so many things available out there, each country has their own modeling tools and their own approaches at doing things already. And if we come and we say like, okay, use this tool, like I said, like, and I'm sure this is why you're raising the question. This is not the truth. This is not exactly what's going to happen. This is not necessarily what it is, but it is a possibility if you consider these options. Initially, the GMPA is here to spark discussion, to bring countries together to the table and be like, hey, like, this is what could happen if you collaborate. If you trade electricity, Indonesia has a lot of like wind potential, for example, whereas Singapore is very like renewable limited. So if the countries collaborate, then you can get to reduce the overall emissions of both countries up to this level. Whereas if you're independently doing it on your own, you might be limited in terms of it might be more expensive, or you might not be able to reach net zero at all. So bring those to the table and then start discussing. The other part of it is we have our assumptions and our underlying data that is currently modeling and displayed in GMPA. The end goal is if we approach country experts and actual policymakers and the people who are making the decisions in those countries, they can help us evaluate and be like, hey, this is not actually true. Like these values that you're using are not consistent to what we see in our country. So they can run their private models, or they can help us update the information so that the model is more useful to them to make decisions towards it. So it's never about trying to get or convince people or get people to think that this is the one truth. It's more about having these conversations and incentivizing that we look at other things as well. It's a difficult balance, but I also think that decision makers also know that these models and tools have these limitations. So hopefully it wouldn't be the case that model outputs are sort of taken as definitive predictions. Okay. So next question I have here. it says some real-world scenarios, like transnational rivers located along critical mineral deposits, will be really hard to model on the GMPA and Stevens because of the reliance on sovereign borders. Thinking of Mekong and other Himalayan rivers that affect South Asian rural communities, even though the hydropower dams are in Chinese jurisdiction. Transnational rivers flow across borders and have data in different languages, and then there are extraction zones that are no man's land, like rare earths in Myanmar. How would you have recommendations on how to model these systems? This is quite a hard question and issue to address. One of the big issues that we've seen with modeling in GMPA with the goal of sort of this overarching goal of countries collaborating with each other is geopolitical aspects. And like I mentioned, like reliance on sovereign borders in many things, whether that's energy, whether that's any other kind of modeling. So it's in itself, in the modeling, it's hard to fully consider that aspect of it. We try to keep that to the side so that when we bring people to the table, then the conversation can start and things can move forward. When you're looking at impacts of rivers that cross borders and impacts on communities, that's a whole sort of like another completely different question. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not super experienced in that area, so I'm not fully sure how I would answer. But yeah, I'll have a think about that. And if anyone else has any expertise, like, please. Okay. So next question that I see
Monica,
is,
just wanted to add,
yes.
want to add a bit of that. So I guess like when it comes to other benefits or drawbacks, like for example, like how it affects rural communities and stuff, the GMPA doesn't explicitly deal with those yet. We're not sure if we want to, and then there's always a debate where like you have economics and non-economic benefits and costs, and whether or not we want to combine them together. Some people don't want it, some people like it. There's lots of research done by Princeton, where if you really try to put the non-economic cost of climate change, then turns out it's like an order of magnitude bigger than any technical economic cost. So then it doesn't matter. Like then why are we even? So if you really try to do that, then the non-economic cost is 10 times bigger than any economic cost. So then all of the energy modeling becomes useless, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is cross-border. So the way countries are currently reporting to the UN under the UNFCCC, countries have to report what are the emissions in the domestic borders, right? And then any emissions that are cross borders, let's say, for example, transportation, shipping or land transport or air transport, if ships go from, one country to another, those emissions are not counted under any specific country's accounts. They count under like international waters. So, that the IMO takes into account all the shipping emissions, and then like there's another agency that takes into account like the airline emissions. So that's an issue with how we define borders, because CO2 does not see borders, right? And yeah, so you are right. Like when there are things that happen, when there are actions that happen across borders, then who is responsible for those emissions? So that's really hard to account for. We can still model some of those things, maybe potentially in GMP or Stevens and stuff, but then you would have to attribute those emissions not to a country, but to a connection or a pair of countries, right? And later on, when you guys do some of this modeling, you will see that certain actions are across borders. And then when it comes to like who do you attribute those emissions to, the same problem comes up. And then you'll get to face that issue, like who do we park these emissions under? And you can't park them under one country or another. So yeah, so it's a very good question. You guys will deal with it soon. Back to you, Monica.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Anik. Okay. Okay. The next question is how to communicate effectively about assumptions. So in real cases, the output for cost is often sensitive and might be flipped due to assumptions change. Yeah, definitely. We're trying to consolidate a lot of efforts in the GMP, at least, to have everything in the methodology and the assumptions very well documented and displayed. It's not currently to the best level that we'd want to get to, but that's one part of it, have everything very clearly documented and explicitly said. The other thing to do with the sensitivity is running sensitivity analysis. So right now we're running on a block of assumptions. So these can be displayed and sort of communicated to people as they are. As we move forward, part of what we want to include is that sensitivity analysis. So we change part of the assumptions and the parameters. And with this feedback with countries, we may be better informed on what kind of data that might be important to run sensitivity analysis with. And then we look at what happens with the cost and with the results overall. And there might be things where changing the data will not flip it and will not really change in a very large way what the combination of technologies is or the total cost. There might be others where it will. So it's just about finding which of those parameters the model is most sensitive to and understand the effects that that has. So it's definitely a task that is sort of like in our wish list and what we want to develop as we move on with the tool, because it is a very important thing to consider. And also going back to that question of how do we make sure that these are not taken by decision makers as like the truth or the actual prediction of what's going to happen, then you can see, okay, we have these options. If these parameters are not exactly right, if these vary by this much, let's say a range between the parameter and like a baseline, if we have this, then it still remains the same, or it's a very sensitive parameter. So it's important to consider. The next thing I see is, what do you think will be biggest energy challenge in the next 20 years? Personally, and this kind of connects to externalities as well, I think the biggest challenge right now and in the coming years will be like the political and geopolitical situation in the world. I think we are at a point where a lot of the technologies and the technical part of it might be available and possible to use, but we are currently in a situation where policies are not favorable at all. Many countries are reversing policies that would incentivize moving on to different systems. We have critical minerals issues, which are very, very tied to politics as well. So I think it goes far from like a technical or even a cost problem. I think the biggest challenge will genuinely be how the world operates with each other. Okay, next question. Energy models are as good as the data that go into them. Yeah, absolutely. What methods does GMPA use to address incomplete, outdated, or uncertain data sets, especially in countries where industrial energy data are limited? How do these uncertainties influence the confidence we should have in the model's recommendations? Definitely. So the current version we're using uses a lot of it's open source data available to anyone at this stage. We use inputs from some other models like starter data kits. For example, Osmosis has already prepared and collected data for their models. So we sometimes use those as inputs for Stevens. These can be Osmosis currently has a lot of like low and middle income countries data collected. But if we don't have that, then we'd use other sources, either national sources or other reports. So we use this as an initial sort of like recommendation, and that's where the impact creation comes from, where we do capacity building exercises or we engage directly with country officials or country experts who might be willing to either share data with us, or they might want to run the models for themselves if they find that it would be useful, if they have like proprietary data, for example, that they can't share. they would be able to run it privately and use the tool to gather some insights. It's always a challenge, but again, like with the whole modeling framework, if we come to a point where we can communicate with countries and engage with them, get a little bit better data, and at the same time understand the sensitivity to these uncertainties, we can get to a point where the outputs are useful enough to take some action. It doesn't necessarily have to be that that's the single solution or just one solution, because it won't be. But just improve, improve, improve as we go. But yeah, it's always an issue where country data at a country level is incomplete. We may use regional assumptions. So that's also another thing. So if it's for ASEAN, for example, an ASEAN member state doesn't have specific data, but we have data for another one, then we might use the regional sort of understanding with the caveat of this is using regional data, so that it's taken always like with a pinch of salt, and that it's not the exact prediction. Okay. So, quote, resilient decision making or, quote, no regret decision making, which recommendations are resilient to the uncertainty?
Yeah, so that's kind of like answering some of the previous
Oh,
questions about uncertainty.
I didn't see that it was you. There's
Yeah.
any. Okay. Cool. I hope that helped answer most of your questions. Is there anything else that anyone would like to add or comment?
I think on the data, like updating data side of things, one of the things we are also trying to do is when we work directly with the countries or potentially with regional organizations like such as ACE, we can try to create those data pipelines. So for example, if we can get approval from the ASEAN member states through ACE, then we can connect directly to ACE, and suddenly like we don't have to like constantly update those things. So that's the whole idea. Initially, we start off with international databases, so we connect with them, and over time we have the effort become distributed. So we get the country experts to kind of own the data as well and own the results because they see the benefits of using the GMPA tool. So that's a long-term goal, but getting there will take a bit of time. There are also like a lot more scripting methods that have been developed over the past couple of years that could potentially help us out. So if I'm sure a lot of you guys have used automated scraping tools. Not everybody, but those who have. When it comes to data, when it comes to data gathering, you guys feel free to use those as well. You don't have to manually do everything, right? If you've used Python, if you use like some scraping software, just go ahead and try that, and then use yourself to like just check those data instead. Okay, thanks, Monica.
Okay, great. I don't see any other questions popping up. And I am aware that we have gone over a little bit of the time. So yeah, if that's it, then we can wrap up for today, and I'll see you all tomorrow.
Dira?
Okay. Thank you, everyone. So, yeah, I just want to add something about GMPA tools itself. I have tried it for myself once, and it was also led by Anik, who guided us throughout the session. And what makes the GMPA model is unique, if we compare to other model, is we can personalize the connection or relationship between countries. So you can find out which countries has the strongest collaboration or potential has the most potential collaboration in order to tackle selected issues regarding to climate and energy. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Anik, but I think this is the most unique value of GMPA tools, and I think you can free to access it on their website before we are getting back again to the training tomorrow. Okay, so
Yeah,
thank you,
definitely.
everyone. I think that's the end of our session tonight. Monica or Anik, do you have something to add?
That's
Okay,
it on my side. Yeah, all good.
Good, all good.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye, everyone.